I don't usually tell this story. It's not that it's classified. Most of it stopped being classified 6 years after the armistice, and the rest of it you could probably reconstruct from the Kalvresh casualty filings if you knew how to read their unit designations. It's not modesty either. I just find that most people hear it and take the wrong thing from it. They hear tactics. They should be hearing biology. The Vethrak relay is nobody's idea of a gathering place. Decommissioned signal station, 42 light minutes off the Tauvrin shipping corridor, 3 functioning heat exchangers, and 1 that rattles when the hull flexes. Commander Orev Shal had commandeered it for the Veterans Council, the same way he commandeered everything, by simply showing up and acting as though the arrangement had already been agreed. There were 11 of us in the main bay that evening, 7 of Shal's younger officers who had come up after the armistice and would never carry field experience. 3 Kalvresh soldiers I recognized immediately by the way they carried their hands, and me. I was the only human. Shal had asked me to speak about the Durvak engagement. I want to be precise about that framing, because it matters. He called it the Durvak engagement, which is what the Kalvresh call it. Our people have no agreed name for it. It isn't in our training records. The 4 of us who came out of that sensor blackout never wrote a formal after-action report, because there was nothing in our reporting structure that had a category for what we'd done. We filed an incident summary. The incident summary said, Fireteam Kestrel, sensor blackout insertion, objective neutralized, no casualties. 14 words. The full story takes longer than that. I pulled a chair away from the wall, turned it around, and sat on it backward with my arms resting on the top rail. The younger officers were watching me the way you watch something unfamiliar, not hostile, just calibrating. The 3 Kalvresh at the back of the room were not watching me that way. They were watching me the way you watch something you already have a file on, and are hoping the file is wrong. I started at the beginning. The Durvak insertion was a punishment assignment. I want to be honest about that too. Our command had a fire team it needed to keep busy without actually giving any sensitive work to. Because one of our 4 had filed a complaint against a superior officer, and the investigation was ongoing. That was Petty Officer Renata Solis. She was the best natural reader I have ever worked with, and she had filed the complaint in good conscience, and the system was making all 4 of us pay for it in the way military systems do, by making us invisible. So they dropped us into a sensor blackout corridor on the Kalvresh border, with instructions to observe and report. No maps of Kalvresh patrol positions, no frequency schedules, no briefing on unit rotations. We had a 6-hour insertion window, a retrieval beacon, and a landmark. A ridge formation the mission planner had labeled Objective Durvak, which turned out to be a comms relay node of moderate tactical significance. Observe it. Note traffic. Report. That was the job. We went in at 0300 local, and we were in position by 0340. I want you to hold that in your mind. The ridge was unfamiliar terrain, we had no prior survey of the approach routes, and we were in position in 40 minutes, without any of us discussing navigation. Solis took point because Solis always took point. She moved the way she moved, which is to say, not the way humans are supposed to move in unknown terrain, stopping at decision points, checking the map overlay, confirming the route. She just walked. The rest of us followed. She stopped twice. Both times, we froze for 90 seconds, and then she started walking again. Neither time did she explain why. That was the first thing I understood, years later. I didn't understand it that night. We held at the ridge until 05:15. No communication. Solis had her eyes on the relay. The rest of us were watching the surrounding terrain in the way you do when you've been doing this long enough that watching is just what your eyes are doing when your mind is somewhere else. At 05:15, Solis touched my arm. She made 3 hand signals. They were not signals from our standard field vocabulary. They were signals she had made up in the moment, and I understood them completely. I have thought about that for 15 years, and I still don't have a clean explanation for it. The signals meant 2 guards, east and west, rotating on a 17-minute cycle, and there is a 12-second window where both of them have their backs turned. She had been watching for 2 hours. She had the rotation. She had the window. She had not written any of this down, not communicated it, not done any visible calculation. She had simply watched, and she knew. We went through in the window. I neutralized the relay node's power coupling, the same type we'd trained on in a completely different theater, Because the Calvresh use standardized infrastructure across their networks, which is efficient and also means that anyone who has seen one of their nodes has seen all of them. And Solis had noticed that the first time we encountered Calvresh hardware, 8 months earlier, in a situation entirely unrelated to this one, she had filed it, not in a report, in herself. We were back across the ridge by 0630. Retrieval came at 0800. No shots fired. Node down. 2 guards with no idea it had happened. The incident summary said 14 words. The debrief took 40 minutes and ended with our commanding officer looking at the 4 of us and saying he didn't understand what we were describing. He wasn't being dismissive. He genuinely didn't understand, in the way you don't understand something when the category for it doesn't exist in your training. When I finished talking, the main bay at the Vethrak relay was quiet. The younger officers were doing the math on the timeline. I could see it, trying to work out how long Solis would have needed to consciously process a 17-minute patrol rotation and derive a 12-second window. The math kept coming back wrong, because the answer was that she hadn't processed it consciously. That wasn't how it had worked. One of the 3 Calvresh veterans at the back of the room stood up. His name was Geth Orvan, and I recognized him from a photograph in a decommissioning file I had read, because I had nothing else to do during a 17-hour transit, and I read everything I can reach. He had been the senior surviving officer of the Dervak relay garrison. He had 6 commendations. He had spent 11 years trying to work out what had happened to his node. He didn't ask a question. He said she had already mapped it. I said yes. He said, before she arrived. I said she had been building the map for 8 months without knowing she was building it. The information was in her, the infrastructure standard, the patrol doctrine she'd inferred from 2 unrelated intercepts, the terrain approach she'd read from satellite imagery she'd glanced at in a briefing for a completely different mission. None of it had been filed anywhere. None of it had been requested. Her mind had simply retained it, sorted it, and produced it when the terrain matched the model. Orvan stood there for a moment. He said, "We had a file on your fire team, personnel records, psychological assessments, service histories." A pause. We did not have a file on what she was doing while she was looking at things. That was the truest thing anyone has ever said about us. And I want to be careful here that you understand, I'm not telling you this because I think it makes us admirable. I am telling you this because I spent 15 years working alongside humans who did what Solis did, to varying degrees, without knowing they were doing it. We are not trained to do it. We cannot turn it off. Every environment we enter, every system we observe, every patrol we watch, we are filing it. Not consciously, not deliberately. The pattern lands in us, and it stays there. And when a situation arises that matches the pattern, the answer surfaces. We don't experience it as intelligence. We experience it as a feeling, a hunch, a sense of which way to turn. We are, most of us, entirely unaware that what we are doing is reading. We think we are guessing. The younger officers in that room were quiet in the specific way people are quiet when they are revising a prior assumption. I've seen that silence before. It always takes the same length of time, long enough to re-examine everything they thought they knew about an encounter with a human that had seemed, at the time, like luck. Orvan sat back down. He didn't say anything else. He had the answer he had been waiting 11 years for, and the answer had not made him feel better. I turned my chair back the right way around and put it against the wall. The debriefs, the incident summaries, the casualty filings, they all have the same gap in them, and I am telling you the gap is not missing data. The gap is that nobody thought to log what we were looking at. We were always looking at something. We are always looking. We don't know how to stop.